Remember when farm equipment wasn't just built tough, but also built a little too close to danger? Well, today we're going to take a look at 20 dangerous tractor features that faded into history. We'll explore vintage innovations that once seemed practical, but turned out to be downright risky. From unprotected spinning shafts to precarious single front wheel designs, these relics shaped the evolution of modern safety standards. So let's jump back in time and see how these machines, for better or worse, left their mark on farming. Number 20, steel wheels with spikes. Now, steel wheels, often studded with spikes or lugs, were standard on many early 1900s tractors, including early Waterloo Boy models, which John Deere acquired in 1918, and various international harvester designs. At the time, rubber tires were not yet the universal norm. Metal wheels provided sturdy traction in mud and uneven terrain, making them a popular choice for farming in transitional roads and fields. However, these wheels posed serious dangers. First, the spikes or lugs could easily snag clothes or limbs, especially since many farmers would stand near the wheels during routine tasks like hooking up an implement or performing on-the-fly maintenance. Now, anecdotal accounts exist of farmers being knocked down or even dragged under the wheel, which could lead to serious injuries or death. Second, these wheels offered minimal shock absorption. Driving at higher speeds, if you could call 5 to 7 miles an hour high speed, across rough ground meant intense jolts that could toss operators from their seats. Now, while older tractors rarely traveled fast, the steel-on-dirt contact was still very harsh on the body, compounding fatigue and the risk of losing control. Another issue was that the steel wheels chewed up paved roads. Some municipalities introduced ordinances to limit or ban the use of tractors with spike-laden steel wheels on public roads. This further spurred the shift to rubber tires in the 30s and 40s. Manufacturers like Firestone started promoting pneumatic tires designed for farming, which improved traction and operator comfort. Although the transition to rubber tires did gain speed in the late 1930s, it still wasn't immediate or universal. Some farmers kept their steel wheels for decades due to the cost or preference. Still, safety and practicality eventually won out. By the 1950s, metal spiked wheels became a relic, kept by a few enthusiasts or just relegated to antique tractor shows. But nostalgia aside, the risk of entanglement and the punishing ride quality made steel wheels one of the more obviously hazardous features that belong firmly in the past. Number 19, exposed belt pulleys. Now, before modern hydraulics and PTO systems became the standard, belt pulleys were a common way to power stationary farm equipment. From threshers to sawmills, early John Deere Model D and International Harvester tractors came equipped with large belt pulleys, often made of steel, wood, or reinforced fiber. While ingenious for the time, the open design spelled danger for anyone nearby. Operators would align their tractor with a stationary machine, and then they'd connect a long, wide belt between the tractor's pulley and the equipment's pulley. This belt could rotate at speeds anywhere from 500 to 1,000 RPM, depending on the job. Given the belt's high velocity, an accidental brush against it could cause a serious burn, laceration, or even a catastrophic injury if someone got entangled. Clothing, hair, or tools too close could be pulled in swiftly, and to make matters worse, alignment was often precarious. A slightly off-kilter setup could cause the belt to slip or jump, snapping back violently. Historically, these pulleys were left uncovered because the technology for reliable shielding was quite limited, and farmers needed quick access to adjust tension or replace belts. The risk wasn't just theoretical, though. Documented incidents exist of farmers losing limbs or sustaining severe injuries from belts that whipped off or from inadvertently reaching into the belt's path. These stories traveled fast in rural communities, prompting demands for a safer design. Manufacturers eventually responded by introducing shields and guard kits, but the real shift came when PTO-driven equipment overtook belt-driven systems in the mid-20th century. While PTO shafts have their own hazards, they're generally less open than a spinning belt. By the 60s and 70s, the rise of self-powered farm implements, often equipped with their own engines or modern hydraulic systems, reduced the need for belt-powered machinery. Still, at antique tractor events today, you can sometimes witness demonstrations of belt-driven equipment. Experienced operators will emphasize safety, usually roping off the area to keep onlookers back. The technology stands as a testament to the ingenuity of early farmers, but also underscores just how far we've come in designing safer power transfer solutions. Number 18, flywheel start mechanisms. Now, on many early tractors, such as the Roomley oil pull or the John Deere Model D in its first iterations, the engine was started by manually spinning an exposed flywheel. This large metal disc, often weighing dozens of pounds, was mounted on the side of the tractor. The operator would grab the rim of the wheel and apply force to spin it fast enough to kick the engine into life. Now, while certainly impressive to watch, it also was a serious safety risk. If the engine misfired or kicked back, the flywheel could jolt violently in the opposite direction, wrenching shoulders or breaking fingers. There are documented cases from the 20s and 30s in which farmers suffered broken arms or wrists when the flywheel abruptly spun back. Some wore heavy gloves or specialized cranking attachments, but these offered limited protection. Additionally, because the wheel itself was massive and fully exposed, onlookers or passers-by could wander too close, risking entanglement. Physical strain was another factor. In cold weather, oils thickened and engines were more stubborn, which necessitated repetitive spins of the hefty flywheel. Overexertion led to fatigue or mistakes, further heightening the chance of injury. It also took skill to judge the right speed, angle, and timing to get the engine to catch without backfiring. By the 1930s and 40s, many tractor manufacturers started introducing electric starters. Companies like International Harvester offered optional electric start kits, and eventually, these became standard, rendering manual flywheel starts largely obsolete. Hand cranks persisted for a while, but even those were less unwieldy than a giant flywheel. Safety was a key motivator in this shift, along with simple convenience. Today, seeing a flywheel start at an antique tractor meet is a novelty, a reminder of just how hands-on farming used to be. And while it might carry a certain old-school charm, the risks are undeniable. Few people who've nearly dislocated a shoulder spinning a bulky flywheel would likely miss these behemoths in everyday use. Number 17. Hand crank starting. Even as tractors moved away from massive flywheel starts, hand crank starters remained prevalent well into the mid-20th century. The Fordson Model F, produced from 1917 to 27, and the Alice Chalmers Model WC from the 1930s are classic examples of popular tractors that often relied on hand cranks. Although less hazardous than a giant flywheel, crank starting carried risks of its own. The biggest threat was the engine kickback. If the spark timing was off or the operator forgot to retard the ignition, the engine could fire early, yanking the crank backward with tremendous force. Broken wrists, fingers, arms, they weren't uncommon.
If it doesn't start, put it in at the bottom again.
Some manufacturers try to mitigate this by recommending a specific hand-over-hand technique, using an open palm grip and pulling upward so that a backfire would kick the crank out of the hand rather than rotating the arm with it. Still, mistakes happened in the field, often when tired or in a hurry. This design also presented trip and fall hazards. The operator had to stand at the front of the tractor, often on uneven ground, with the crank protruding outward. It was easy to lose footing in muddy conditions. In some older models, you had to simultaneously manipulate choke and throttle controls while cranking, complicating the process even further. Operators usually learn through trial and error, sometimes with painful lessons. Electric starters started appearing as optional features in the 20s and 30s on certain premium models, but many farmers didn't see the need or couldn't afford the additional cost until well after World War II. Once electric starters became more commonplace and affordable, the old hand crank approach quickly faded. In modern times, hand cranks are mostly a curiosity, shown off at tractor shows by enthusiasts who demonstrate the proper method to an audience that's both amazed and a little horrified. Now, while the skill that it took to start a tractor by hand may evoke nostalgia, there's little doubt that it was a risky procedure. The near-instant adoption of electric starters once prices dropped underscores just how relieved many farmers were to leave the hand crank in the past. Number 16. Non-synchronized transmissions. Early tractors, including models like the Farmall Regular, which was introduced in 1924, or the Ford Ferguson 9N, released in 1939, frequently had unsynchronized gearboxes. This meant that operators had to master the art of double clutching or come to a full stop to shift gears. Grinding gears wasn't just an embarrassing noise, it could damage the transmission or cause dangerous lurches. Because unsynchronized transmissions demanded precise timing, new or fatigued operators were prone to error. A missed shift at the wrong moment, especially on a hill, could lead to a sudden rolling or a gear jam. On older models with weaker brakes, the moment of uncontrolled motion could spell disaster. Beyond the mechanical risk, the driver's attention would be absorbed by gear changes, diverting focus from obstacles or uneven terrain. Farmers often resorted to shifting techniques that were gleaned from truck driving, but even that didn't guarantee safety. In tractors with less robust shift linkages, forcing the gear lever could cause it to stick. The operator might then need to wiggle or yank the lever while simultaneously wrestling with the clutch, an awkward maneuver that could momentarily distract from steering or speed control. Furthermore, these early transmissions often lack basic safety interlocks that we take for granted today. Modern tractors generally prevent starting in gear or require the clutch to be engaged before the ignition. Older tractors could start in gear, unexpectedly lurching forward or backward as soon as the engine fired. a scenario that caused more than a few accidents in barns or near farmyard structures. The move to partially synchronized, then fully synchronized, and eventually hydrostatic transmissions in the later 20th century was a game changer for tractor safety. Easier, smoother shifting, reduced mechanical strain, operator stress, and the risk of control loss. While there is a certain charm to operating a vintage, unsynchronized transmission at a tractor show, day-to-day fieldwork made it painfully clear that simpler, safer shifting was a necessity. Number 15. Open cabs with no weather or rollover protection. Before the advent of enclosed cabs, tractors were largely open-air machines. The classic Farmall M, produced from 1939 to 52, and many earlier Fordson and John Deere models had little more than a basic steel seat, an exposed steering wheel, and some fenders. This design made it easy to hop on and off, which was convenient for a quick farm task, but it left operators vulnerable to weather, airborne debris, and most critically, rollovers. Rain, snow, and scorching sun all took their toll on an operator's comfort, but that was just the beginning of the hazards. If a tractor hit a rut or a ditch, the lack of a rollover protective structure, or ROPS, meant that the entire machine could just flip, crushing or trapping the driver underneath. Early safety statistics from the mid-20th century show that rollovers were the leading cause of tractor-related fatalities. Tales of dangerous slopes or sudden drop-offs were all too common, and lacking protection, operators often fared poorly in accidents. Many open-cab tractors didn't even have seat belts, and because there was nowhere to strap them to. If the tractor overturned, the operator's only recourse was to jump clear if they had the reaction time. But even that was a gamble. Falling into the path of a rear wheel or the implement being towed behind could be equally disastrous. Now, while cabs started appearing finally in the 60s, they were initially seen as luxuries, heavy, hot, and expensive add-ons that only large farming operations could afford. Over time, manufacturers improved ventilation, introducing heating and air conditioning, and most importantly, integrated robust roll bars, or ROPS, into the cab frame. John Deere, for instance, began incorporating ROPS in the late 60s and 70s, setting a precedent that others followed. Eventually, regulatory bodies mandated ROPS for newer tractor models, slashing rollover-related fatalities. Although open cab tractors do still exist, especially among older collectors, modern safety expectations and regulations mean that it's unusual to see brand new machines without some form of protective enclosure. Nostalgia for the open air aside, staying safe inside a fortified cab is a major upgrade that no one denies has saved countless lives. Number 14. Lack of rollover protective structures, or ROPS. Now, closely tied to the open cab issue that we just discussed is the absence of dedicated rollover protective structures. Early tractors from brands like Massey Harris, Oliver, and Minneapolis Moline featured sturdy frames, but no real protective cage or bar. The center of gravity in these tractors could be surprisingly high, especially when pulling heavy loads or working on a slope. One misjudgment of an incline or a sharp turn, and the tractor could roll. Now, rollovers were notoriously deadly. Without a roll bar or protective frame, the operator was typically thrown to the ground and crushed under the tractor's weight. Archival safety reports from the 40s through the 60s show a grim pattern. Rollover accidents made up a substantial portion of on-farm fatalities. Survivors often recounted just how quickly it happened, a moment's lapse in attention or an unseen drop-off, and that was it. A push for ROPS gained momentum in the 1960s when agricultural extension services began conducting rollover tests and publishing alarming results. Engineers demonstrated that even a simple roll bar, if the operator wore a seatbelt, could create a safe zone, protecting the driver's head and torso. Scandinavian countries were early adopters of mandatory ROPS on new tractors in the 50s and 60s, paving the way for broader acceptance worldwide. The United States followed suit, and by the 70s, many manufacturers offered ROPS as standard or optional equipment on newly sold tractors. However, older tractors remained in service. Retrofitting ROPS onto vintage models was possible but a bit expensive, and some farmers resisted the cost. Over time, educational campaigns stressed the life-saving benefits, slowly improving adoption rates. It's now widely recognized that a properly installed ROPS plus a seatbelt is the single most effective measure to prevent death or serious injury in a tractor rollover. Today, seeing a tractor without ROPS in a regular agricultural use is quite rare, but most safety-conscious operators will either upgrade older equipment with a roll bar or just simply move on to more modern models. Nevertheless, the legacy of open-air, unprotected tractors serves as a cautionary tale of how an industry had to learn the hard way about rollover risks. Number 13. Early hand clutches. Hand clutches were once prevalent on certain makes and models. John Deere's two-cylinder models like the A, B, and G lines famously employed a hand-operated clutch system for decades. Instead of a foot pedal, the driver engaged or disengaged the transmission by moving a lever. On the surface, it seemed manageable, but in real-world use, it introduced a series of safety complications. First, using your arm to operate the clutch left fewer limbs available for steering and brake control. Tractor operators often needed to maneuver through tight spots, watch out for obstacles, or align with implements. Juggling the clutch lever with the left hand while steering with the right, and possibly also working the throttle, could lead to confusion or missed moves. If something went wrong, the immediate reaction time to disengage the clutch might be slower than stomping a foot pedal. Second, the hand clutch lever's placement varied among models. On some tractors, you had to reach around or across the other controls, risking unintentional contact with a hot engine part or a rotating linkage. This was especially true if the tractor had additional levers for PTO or hydraulic lift. Drivers would sometimes accidentally knock the tractor into gear or out of it if they bumped the lever, leading to sudden jerks. Now, there are anecdotal reports from old-time farmers who lost control when the lever got stuck or when their hand slipped, typically on a sweaty or muddy day. Moreover, on hillsides, the hand clutch offered less intuitive control for preventing a rollback. Foot clutches eventually dominated, and for a good reason. They allowed the operator to keep both hands on the steering wheel in critical moments and provided more precise, immediate control over power engagement. Although some modern specialty tractors, like orchard or vineyard tractors, still might employ unique clutch arrangements, the widespread adoption of foot pedals and sophisticated transmissions has largely relegated the old hand clutch to a nostalgic footnote. Vintage tractor enthusiasts often highlight the hand clutch as part of a classic experience, but also acknowledge that it was a design that could be awkward and occasionally dangerous in untrained hands. Number 12, the Tricycle narrow front. In the early to mid-20th century, row crop farming demanded a tractor that could navigate between narrow rows of corn, cotton, and other plants. Manufacturers like Farmall, notably the Farmall Regular, F20, and later the H&M series, and John Deere, Model A and B, offered a narrow front or tricycle configuration. The design placed two small front wheels close together, often nearly touching, under the tractor's nose. This setup provided excellent maneuverability in row crop applications. The tight turning radius let operators whip around at the end of a field and jump into the next row with ease. However, the trade-off was stability, specifically lateral stability. With such a narrow footprint up front, the risk of tipping over sideways increased, especially if the tractor hit a rut, embankment, or just turned too sharply at speed. Countless farmers recall near-tip or full-tip incidents, especially on uneven ground. Another hazard was high centering in muddy or rutted fields. The front wheels could easily plunge into a deep furrow, pitching the tractor forward or sideways in a heartbeat. Now, operators sometimes tried to counterbalance this with rear wheel spacing or added ballast, but the fundamental geometry still favored row cropping over general stability. The design also made the tractor front end lighter, occasionally leading to wheelies or rearing if the rear wheels caught a strong load or sticky soil. Now, starting in the 1950s and 60s, as farming practices shifted and safety became more prominent, manufacturers began offering wide front options for the same models. Many farmers found the wide front tractors easier to handle on slopes and less nerve-wracking in rough terrain. But even so, the nimble narrow front configuration remained popular among row crop enthusiasts for decades, all thanks to its specialized utility. Today, narrow front tractors are almost entirely phased out in modern designs. They live on at tractor shows and among collectors who prize their maneuverability and nostalgic charm. Yet, from a pure safety standpoint, few would argue against the wide front configuration's superior stability. The Tricycle front stands as one of those design choices that addressed a specific need but ended up on the dangerous list once broader safety and versatility considerations came into play. Number 11 is the gas tank mounted over the engine. Now, older tractors, including some Farmall Letter series and early Fordsons, mounted the fuel tank over the engine or just behind the engine cowling. The reason was straightforward: gravity feed. Before reliable fuel pumps became common, positioning the tank up high allowed fuel to just flow down to the carburetor without needing a mechanical or electric pump. However, placing a flammable fuel source directly above a hot engine obviously presented risks. Leaks were a major concern. If a seam or fuel line developed a crack, raw gasoline could drip onto the engine. In the worst case, that led to a fire. It wasn't unusual for old newspapers or farm reports from the 20s through the 50s to carry stories of tractors going up in flames from a small crack in the fuel line. Even a minor backfire through the carb could ignite gas vapors lingering around the engine area. And because the tractor's operator sat immediately behind the assembly, quick evacuation was also sometimes challenging. Heat also caused expansion in the fuel tank, increasing pressure. If the venting system was blocked or malfunctioning, pressure could build up, leading to more frequent leaks or sprayed fuel when the cap got removed. Now, during hot summer work, operators sometimes noticed the strong smell of gas, a telltale sign of vapor or small leaks, but they might continue working out of necessity. Courting potential disaster. In addition, the design placed the operator in close proximity to both heat and fuel. Simple tasks like refueling required leaning over a hot engine, which could be intimidating and dangerous if you spilled fuel. Over time, as technology improved, tractors with electric or mechanical fuel pumps let manufacturers relocate tanks to a safer position, like under or behind the seat, away from the direct heat of the engine. Modern tractors generally kept the fuel source away from the operator and engine, often on the side or the rear of the machine, with far more robust fuel lines and safety features. Now, while the gravity-fed approach remains mechanically simple, the danger of having a fuel tank perched atop a hot power plant is a design aspect that few modern operators would embrace today. Number 10, minimal or poor brake systems. In the early 20th century, tractors were primarily designed to pull heavy loads at slow speeds, so braking systems often received minimal attention. Early Fordson models and other contemporaries used rudimentary drum brakes or band brakes on the rear wheels, which were only somewhat effective at slower field speeds. These brakes could overheat or fade quickly under high speeds or when carrying heavier loads. Furthermore, many vintage tractors lacked front-wheel brakes entirely. The logic was that the tractor's weight, coupled with its slow operational velocity, meant rear brakes sufficed. But on slopes, particularly with a loaded wagon or implement in tow, the braking capacity could be woefully inadequate. The wheels might lock up, causing a skid, or simply fail to grip in wet or loose soil. Some farmers recall rolling backward down hills or failing to stop at farm road intersections, narrowly missing collisions. The braking issue was compounded by the presence of split brake pedals, a feature still found on modern tractors for maneuverability, but with better overall design. Each rear wheel had its own brake pedal, allowing tight turning. On older machines with poorly adjusted or worn brakes, pressing both pedals simultaneously often led to uneven braking, causing the tractor to swerve or pivot unexpectedly. Combine that with poor road surfaces or a heavy trailer, and you had a recipe for near misses or actual accidents. As tractor speeds increased in the 50s and 60s, some now could travel 15 miles an hour or more on roads. Manufacturers recognized the need for stronger, more reliable braking systems. Disc brakes or improved wet brake designs started to appear, offering better heat dissipation and stopping power. But nonetheless, older tractors soldiered on, and for many owners, they had to retrofit or meticulously maintain the original brakes to ensure a morsel of safety. Now today, advanced braking systems and hydraulic assist, all-wheel or at least front axle braking, and sophisticated control linkages are all standard in new tractors. That evolution underscores just how vital effective brakes have become in modern farming, especially given the increased size, weight, and speed of contemporary equipment. Number 9, exposed power takeoff or PTO shafts. The exposed power takeoff, again PTO, revolutionized how tractors could supply power to implements like a mower, baler, or auger. Ford's 8N tractor, introduced in 1947, famously featured a PTO shaft at the rear. However, older and even some mid-century models had no protective shield around that spinning shaft. The operator or bystanders could easily come into contact with the rapidly rotating metal, creating a prime entanglement hazard. Clothing, particularly loose work shirts or overalls, could be caught instantly, pulling the individual into the mechanism. The injuries would be severe: broken bones, amputations, or worse. Safety campaigns in the 50s and 60s started highlighting the PTO as one of the most dangerous points of contact on a tractor. County extension offices and farm safety organizations distributed pamphlets and presented demonstrations, sometimes using scare tactics like mannequins to illustrate just how quickly and violently a PTO could entangle a person. Additionally, some older designs force the operator to be near the PTO shaft to adjust settings on the implements. Balers, for instance, could require manual twine threading or checking for jams, placing a farmer dangerously close to a spinning shaft. With no guard, all it took was one slip or momentary distraction. Now, manufacturers began supplying PTO shields, often a hinged metal cover over the shaft. Retrofits were also offered for older tractors. Gradually, regulations and industry standards emerged, making PTO guards mandatory on a new machine. A protected PTO significantly reduced accidental contact, though it's still critical for operators to shut off the tractor and wait for the shaft to stop spinning before approaching any connected implements. Modern tractors usually feature fully enclosed PTO systems and require additional guarding on implements themselves. Despite these advancements, PTO-related incidents do still happen today, often when guards are removed for convenience or left off after repairs. It's a sobering reminder that even a proven power transfer technology can be perilous without appropriate safeguards. One more reason older, unshielded PTO setups have largely disappeared into history. Number 8. Poor lighting and reflectors for road travel. In the early to mid-1900s, driving a tractor on public roads was less frequent but still necessary. Farmers sometimes had to travel between fields, take equipment into town for repairs, or haul loads. Unfortunately, many tractors from that era either lacked proper lights or had extremely dim headlights and no rear lighting at all. Reflective tape or slow-moving vehicles, or SMV emblems, weren't standardized until the latter half of the 20th century. As a result, these slow, often dark-colored machines were nearly invisible at dawn, dusk, or in poor weather. Rural roads in the 1930s and 40s were already hazardous at night, typically unlit and narrow. A motorist cruising at higher speeds may not see the slow-moving tractor until it was too late to avoid a collision. Even in daytime, the dusty conditions around fields could obscure a tractor's silhouette. Rear reflectors were either absent or inadequate, and turning signals, well, they didn't exist on older models. Some operators improvised by wiring makeshift car headlights onto fenders or maybe using lanterns. Others relied on hand signals or just hoped that local drivers knew what to look for on farm equipment. Predictably, the accident rates were high. Newspaper archives occasionally detail tragic stories of cars plowing into the back of a tractor on a dark country road. As tractor horsepower and functionality grew, the need for safer road travel increased. By the 60s and 70s, many new tractors came standard with at least very minimal lighting, headlights, taillights, and warning flashers. The slow-moving vehicle, or again SMV triangle, was standardized in the 60s in the US and Canada, requiring reflective signage to alert drivers of vehicles traveling under 25 miles an hour. Over time, these regulations and design features drastically cut down on nighttime and low-visibility collisions. Modern tractors often sport full lighting packages, brake lights, turn signals, and bright flashers. Some large farm operations even use escort vehicles when moving oversized machinery. While older tractors can still be legally driven on public roads, most safety-conscious owners retrofit them with better lighting and SMV emblems, acknowledging that the old no-light approach was simply way too dangerous. Number 7. Hard steel or pan seats. Now take a look at early tractor seats, like the Fordson Model F or International Harvester Titan 1020, and you're going to notice a simple metal pan. Yeah, usually it's pressed steel with a few drainage holes. These seats offered minimal cushioning and virtually no ergonomic support. Now while that might not seem like a direct safety issue, the impact on the driver's control and alertness was significant. Extended hours of field work on a jarring steel pan seat would cause back pain, numbness in the legs, and general fatigue. A fatigued operator is more prone to mistakes, failing to spot an obstacle, misjudging a turn, or reacting slowly to a sudden mechanical issue. In the worst cases, hitting a deep hole or rock at moderate speed could literally bounce the driver off the seat. Without seat belts or any form of restraint, there was nothing to prevent a fall into moving wheels or onto a path of trailing implements. Moreover, the simple steel seats got blistering hot in the summer and icy cold in the winter. Farmers often improvised by wrapping a burlap sack or a horse blanket around them, but that was hardly a robust solution. Some seats were perforated and had a curvature to fit the operator, yet these designs still fell short of providing genuine comfort or any kind of protection. By the 40s and 50s, tractor manufacturers started to introduce spring suspensions for seats, sometimes with rudimentary padding. Later, as the importance of operator ergonomics grew, more sophisticated seats emerged, featuring shock absorbers, foam cushions, and adjustable settings. These improvements weren't just about comfort, they directly impacted safety by reducing operator fatigue and helped maintain consistent control over the machine. In modern tractors, air suspension seats are standard on many models, drastically cutting down vibration and jarring. Once you've experienced the difference, it's hard to imagine going back to a bare steel pan. Looking at those early seats at tractor shows or in museums, it provides a stark reminder that a simple design oversight, like maybe ignoring basic comfort, could lead to safety risks in the demanding environment of farm work. Number 6. The overly high center of gravity. Some vintage tractors, especially those designed for narrow row operations or certain specialized tasks, ended up with a higher center of gravity than modern equivalents. Models like the Allis-Chalmers C or B and certain variants from Oliver or Minneapolis Moline were not drastically top-heavy by design, but combined with small tires or certain wheel arrangements, they posed rollover risks on uneven terrain. Imagine a machine whose engine, transmission, and operator seat are all elevated significantly above the axle line. Now place that machine on a slope or a soft embankment. A slight tilt might be manageable, but an unexpected dip on one side or a sudden turn could shift the tractor's balance enough to lift a wheel. In an era before widely adopted ROPS, that could lead to a swift, uncontrollable tip. Field conditions made this even worse. Furrows, drainage ditches, or gopher holes could catch a tire, pitching the tractor sideways. Farmers also sometimes overestimated the angle that they could safely traverse. Without the benefit of modern stability calculations or specialized training, guesswork, it could turn deadly if the tractor's tipping point was reached. Manufacturers did try to address these concerns. Adjustable rear wheel spacing became common, allowing farmers to widen the stance for better stability. However, not everyone took advantage of these adjustments, particularly if their rows were planted close together. Some simply couldn't afford multiple wheel setups. Weight distribution kits or ballast weights were also sold to lower the center of gravity or improve traction, but these added costs and complexity. As technology advanced, tractor designs increasingly balance power, traction, and stability. Modern row crop tractors often have longer wheelbases, larger tires, and lower engines relative to the axles. Four-wheel drive and advanced suspension systems further reduce the risk of tipping, while older high-riding tractors remain a symbol of nostalgic farming scenes. Their precarious balance is yet another entry into the catalog of features that look good on paper but fell short in real-world safety. Number 5. Manual ignition timing adjustments. Now, in early gasoline tractors, including some of the first Farmall, John Deere, and Fordson models, operators had to manually adjust the spark timing when the engine ran. A lever controlled the magneto or distributor advance, which helped match the engine's timing to its load and speed. Now, this might sound straightforward to gearheads, but in practice, it introduced plenty of room for error and danger. If the spark was advanced too far when starting the engine, a kickback became more likely, injuring wrists or arms of those using a crank start or a flywheel start. During operation, incorrect timing could cause engine knocking or overheating, which could lead to mechanical failures. A distracted operator might forget to retard the spark when idling or shut down. That could cause backfires through the exhaust or carburetor, risking engine damage or even small fires if there were fuel vapors present. Additionally, the lever for adjusting timing was sometimes placed near other controls or in awkward locations. Fumbling around to find it while driving could lead to momentarily letting go of a steering wheel or losing track of obstacles ahead. Meanwhile, advanced timing under heavy load could overheat the engine, making conditions ripe for radiator boilovers or even cracked cylinder heads. By the 40s and 50s, more tractors came with automatic or semi-automatic ignition systems, reducing the operator's workload and the chance for mistakes. Distributors with centrifugal or vacuum advanced mechanisms took over, matching spark timing to engine conditions without human intervention. Now, the shift dramatically reduced the risk of timing-related accidents and mechanical failure. Now, while some vintage tractor enthusiasts still enjoy the hands-on approach of manual timing, citing the operator skill and mechanical understanding it fosters, most modern users agree that advanced ignition systems are far safer. Looking back, the manual control of spark timing stands as an example of how older designs place significant responsibilities on the driver, often at the expense of safety and convenience. Number 4. No power steering. When tractor horsepower started climbing in the mid-20th century, so did their size and weight, yet many still lack power steering. Muscling the front wheels, especially with a fully loaded front-end loader or in deep mud, was physically taxing. The operator needed considerable upper body strength just to turn the wheel at low speeds. If the wheel caught on a rut or a furrow, it could jerk violently, wrenching wrists or shoulders. In row crop models with narrow fronts, the steering effort wasn't as extreme on hard ground, but in softer fields, controlling the direction remained a chore. Farmers accustomed to the older mechanical steering simply gritted their teeth and managed, but fatigue was a real factor. An exhausted driver was slower to react to a sudden hazard or might inadvertently swerve into a ditch when their arms gave out. Power steering first appeared as a luxury feature, often on larger tractors built by companies like Oliver, Allis-Chalmers, or John Deere for commercial farming operations. Over time, it trickled down to smaller and medium-duty models. This transformation didn't just reduce operator fatigue, it dramatically improved precision and safety. A farmer no longer had to stand and lean into the steering wheel to make a turn with a heavy load on the front axle. Still, many older tractors soldiered on without power steering well into the 70s and even the 80s, especially on smaller family farms. Retrofitting power steering could be expensive and complicated. Some operators insisted that they didn't need it, having learned the old ways. Yet for novices or farmhands transitioning from modern equipment, the absence of power steering came as a rude awakening, often accompanied by bruised knuckles. As a result, power steering is now all but standard on any tractor larger than a garden mower, and for good reason. It not only enhances productivity, but prevents accidents tied to driver fatigue and lack of control. Another piece of the puzzle in making tractors safer and more user-friendly, power steering helped relegate the era of strong-arm steering into a historical footnote. Number 3, poor weight distribution and ballasting. Early tractor designs didn't always prioritize balanced weight distribution. Some models, like the Fordson Model F, were notoriously front-heavy or back-heavy, depending on the attachments and tasks. This imbalance could cause the tractor's front end to rear up under load, or its rear end to lose traction and swing around unexpectedly on slippery ground. One of the more terrifying scenarios involved pulling a heavy load, like a plow stuck in thick clay or a tree stump, only to have the tractor's front end lift up off the ground. The operator's instinct might be to press the clutch, but if the front end came up fast enough, the tractor could flip backward in what was termed a rear overturn. The type of accident was a leading cause of fatalities in early tractor use, second only to side rollovers. With no ROPS, the operator had almost no chance once the tractor began flipping. Ballast weights or filled rear tires, using liquid ballast like calcium chloride for example, eventually became common solutions to improve traction and balance. Still, it took many years and countless accidents before the importance of proper ballasting was fully appreciated. Some farmers tried homemade fixes, like strapping iron railroad ties or concrete blocks to the front end. While these methods could help a bit, they sometimes introduced new hazards if the makeshift weights weren't securely fastened. Over time, tractor manufacturers began offering integral weight kits and refined chassis designs. Wider stances, longer wheelbases, and improved hitch geometry also helped ensure that pulling forces didn't automatically pivot the tractor's nose skyward. The introduction of three-point hitches by Harry Ferguson, popularized in the Ford Ferguson 9N, further improved weight distribution by placing implements in a way that partly transferred weight onto the tractor's rear wheels without causing abrupt lifts. Modern tractors now come with detailed guidelines for ballasting, often spelled out in owner's manuals, and feature dynamic systems to shift weight where it's needed. The difference is day and night compared to the old days, when you only had to rely on guesswork or personal misfortune to discover the perils of improper weight distribution. Number 2, overheating radiators and boilovers. Now, cooling systems on early tractors were rudimentary, often consisting of simple thermosiphon setups without water pumps. Models like the Farmall F20 or older John Deere 2-cylinders relied on the natural circulation of water heated by the engine rising to the top of the radiator and then cooling as it fell. Now, while this worked in mild conditions, heavy loads or scorching summer temperatures could push these systems to the limit. Boilovers were more than just inconvenient. When coolant, often just water, spewed from the radiator cap, it could scald an operator who happened to be leaning forward or a bystander nearby. Steam and hot water could cause second-degree burns. Many operators tried to prevent this by keeping the radiator topped off, but that meant handling boiling water once it started to overflow. Stories exist of farmers opening the radiator cap slightly, only to have it explode in a plume of steam when pressure built up. Another danger was engine damage leading to sudden failures, like cracked cylinder heads, which could cause the tractor to seize up unexpectedly. If that happened on a hillside or busy road, loss of power steering, if there was any steering assist at all, and brakes might make the tractor uncomfortable. Overheating also increased the risk of engine fires if there was any fuel leak or flammable materials near the manifold. As tractors evolved, more efficient cooling systems with water pumps, thermostats, and pressurized radiator caps became the norm. This allowed higher operating temperatures without boiling, improving engine performance and reducing the chance of scalding accidents. By the 50s and 60s, most mainstream models featured robust cooling designs that cope better with heavy workloads and hot climates. While it is still possible for a modern tractor to overheat under extreme conditions, the risk of a sudden geyser of scalding water is far lower than the old days of open, unpressurized systems. Many antique tractor collectors still take special care when running vintage units at shows, ensuring that they don't push older cooling systems to the point of boiling, a safety lesson learned from countless mishaps of the past. Number 1. Minimal safety guards on fan blades and engine belts. Finally, one of the most glaring oversights in early tractor design was the near-complete lack of guarding around moving engine parts. Fan blades, cooling belts, and other spinning pulleys were often left exposed. You could see this plainly on tractors like the McCormick Deering 1530 or older John Deere models, where the front grille was little more than a decorative casting with wide open slats. Anyone leaning over the engine for a routine check, like adding oil, tightening a belt, or just pushing away debris, risk contact with the spinning fan or belt. A slip of the foot, a moment of inattention, or loose clothing could pull someone into these parts, causing deep cuts or broken fingers. On more than one occasion, a belt snapped and lashed out, which could leave a painful welt or a more serious injury. Adding to the hazard was the general farmland environment, rife with mud, hay, and crop residue. Now, these materials would get stuck in moving parts, prompting the operator to reach in and clear jams while the engine was running. Without a proper guard, the chance of accidental contact skyrocketed. Over time, manufacturers introduced wire mesh grills and partial covers, but it was still common well into the mid-20th century to see a big, easily accessible gap. Eventually, increased awareness and stricter safety regulations led to better shielding requirements. Modern tractors feature robust shrouds, sealed compartments, and warnings reminding operators not to work on or near moving parts. Quick-release panels and early service points also reduce the need to reach into hazardous zones when the engine is running. Despite these advancements, older tractors remain popular among collectors who appreciate their simpler mechanics and classic aesthetic. But even die-hard enthusiasts acknowledge the dangers. They often retrofit additional guards or at least caution spectators and new operators to never approach these spinning components casually. It's a fitting endpoint to the list. Something so basic, just covering up a dangerous moving part, took decades to become standard, illustrating how farm equipment safety evolved through trial, error, and unfortunately, way too many accidents. Hey, farming is not for the faint of heart back then. Farming certainly wasn't for the faint of heart back then. These 20 dangerous tractor features highlight just how progress isn't about bigger engines or fancier tech. It's about protecting the hardworking people in the field. We hope you found this video helpful, whether you're a history buff, a tractor enthusiast, or if you're just curious how these classic machines paved the way for modern safety. If you love digging up nostalgic yet practical insights like this, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the gear that shaped our world. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there, on the farm or off.